I didn't inherit this company. I built it. And for the last 8 years, I've been funding it alone. The words hung in the air like smoke from a just fired gun. The ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel fell into a silence so complete that I could hear the ice cube shifting in someone's whiskey glass 3 tables away. 500 of Chicago's most influential business leaders stared at me from their seats, their faces painted with expressions ranging from shock to fascination to barely concealed delight at witnessing such spectacular family warfare unfold in real time. My sister Victoria stood frozen at the front table, her champagne flute halfway to her lips, the liquid trembling like her hand. My father Robert sat beside her, his face drained of all color except for 2 angry red spots on his cheekbones. Neither of them had expected this moment, the moment when their carefully constructed narrative would crumble like a house built on sand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you how a 52-year-old woman who had spent her entire adult life building something magnificent watched it get stolen from her by the very people who were supposed to love her most. And more importantly, let me tell you how she took it all back. Flashback 3 weeks earlier. The morning smelled like concrete, dust, and possibility. I stood on the construction site of what would become the new children's wing of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, my hard hat slightly askew, my hair escaping from its neat chignon in the Chicago wind. Around me, workers moved with practiced precision, following blueprints that had lived in my imagination for 2 years before I'd managed to convince the board that healing spaces needed more than just functionality, they needed soul. Grace, my site manager, Carlos, jogged over with his clipboard clutched to his chest. The foundation pour looks perfect. We're actually ahead of schedule. I smiled, feeling that familiar rush of pride that came with seeing a dream take physical form. At 52, I'd been building things for 30 years, first small residential projects when I was fresh out of architecture school, then commercial buildings, and finally the massive infrastructure projects that had made Reynolds Construction one of the most respected firms in the Midwest. But hospitals remained my favorite. Maybe because my mother Margaret had spent so much time in them during her battle with cancer 5 years ago. Maybe because I understood what it meant to need walls that felt like hope instead of despair. Mrs. Reynolds? A young voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Sarah, my newest assistant, picking her way carefully across the uneven ground in heels that were definitely not construction site appropriate. Your father called the office. He wants to see you at the company headquarters this afternoon. He said it was about the quarterly board meeting tomorrow. I nodded, already mentally shifting gears. Tomorrow's meeting was crucial. We were presenting the proposal for the new city library project, a contract worth $45 million. My father, Robert, officially retired but still holding the title of chairman emeritus, rarely involved himself in day-to-day operations anymore. He spent most of his time at his lake house in Wisconsin, fishing and complaining about how complicated everything had gotten since computers took over. But lately, he'd been showing up more often. And when he did, my sister Victoria was usually not far behind. At Reynolds Construction headquarters that afternoon, the lobby of Reynolds Construction still smelled like my childhood polished wood, old leather, and the faintest trace of my father's cigars, though he quit smoking them in the building years ago. The walls were lined with framed photographs of our projects. The first office building I designed at 27, the shopping center that had launched us into commercial development, the university science complex that had won 3 architectural awards. But it was the smaller photos that always caught my eye, the ones of my late husband David and me at various groundbreaking ceremonies. Our 3 children as they grew up on construction sites, and one of my father teaching me to read blueprints when I was 8 years old, both of us covered in dirt and grinning like conspirators. Race, honey. Victoria's voice rang out from the elevator alcove. My younger sister emerged looking like she'd stepped off the cover of Architectural Digest, perfectly blown out blonde hair, cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, smile that could cut glass. Dad's waiting for us upstairs. Victoria had joined the company 5 years ago after her divorce from her tech entrepreneur husband left her needing what she called a fresh start. She'd brought her MBA and her marketing background, and I had to admit, she'd done wonders for our brand visibility. Reynolds Construction had gone from being a respected local firm to having a national reputation. She'd orchestrated magazine features, speaking engagements, even a small documentary about women in construction that had aired on PBS. But something about the way she said us made my stomach tighten. We rode the elevator to the top floor in uncomfortable silence. Victoria checked her phone constantly, her manicured nails tapping against the screen. I found myself thinking about David, wondering what he would make of all this. He died in a car accident 6 years ago, and there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't wish I could still turn to him for advice. He'd always been good at reading people, better than I was. He would have noticed things about Victoria's behavior that I'd chosen to overlook. The ambush. The conference room looked different. That was the first thing that struck me as Victoria and I walked through the glass doors. The long mahogany table that had hosted thousands of meetings was covered with thick folders, legal documents, and what appeared to be presentation materials. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by two men I didn't recognize in expensive suits. Victoria's seat was already marked with a name placard. Mine wasn't anywhere to be seen. Grace. My father stood, his 72-year-old frame still imposing despite the slight stoop that had developed in recent years. Please, sit wherever you're comfortable. The phrase hit me like a slap. Sit wherever you're comfortable. As if I were a guest in the company I'd been running for the past 15 years, ever since his first heart attack had forced him into semi-retirement. I took a seat across from one of the unknown men, my hands folded carefully in my lap. Dad, what's this about? I thought we were discussing tomorrow's presentation. He exchanged a look with Victoria, who suddenly seemed very interested in the contents of her water glass. Grace, honey, your sister and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future of this company. About succession planning. About modernization. The word modernization fell between us like a stone into still water, creating ripples I could feel but couldn't yet identify. Over the past few months, he continued, Victoria has shown remarkable leadership initiative. The Forbes article about our sustainable building practices, the contract with the Chicago public school system that she personally negotiated, these are the kinds of forward-thinking moves that positions us for the next phase of growth. I felt something cold settling in my chest. Dad, those projects wouldn't have been possible without the foundational work we've done over the past. Of course, he interrupted, holding up a hand. Your contributions have been substantial. You've been the backbone of this company, Grace. The workhorse. The reliable one. The reliable one. The workhorse. Each word landed like a small wound. Victoria finally looked up from her water glass. Grace, we want you to know that you'll always have a place here. The board has agreed to create a new position for you, Chief Operating Officer. You'd oversee day-to-day operations while I handle strategic direction and external relations. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. While you handle strategic direction? As CEO, my father said, his voice gentle but firm. Victoria will be taking over as CEO, effective immediately. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles going white against the dark wood. I'm sorry, what? It's not personal, Grace, Victoria said, and for a moment, her voice almost sounded sincere. It's just that the company needs a different kind of leadership for the challenges ahead. You're brilliant at the technical side, at managing projects, but you think I can't handle the strategic side? My voice was quiet, controlled. 25 years of marriage to David had taught me how to keep my emotions in check when the ground was shifting beneath my feet. It's not about what you can't handle, one of the suited men interjected. It's about optimizing skill sets. Ms. Victoria Reynolds has demonstrated exceptional capability in Who are you? I asked. This is Jonathan Winters from Hartley and Associates, my father said. He's been helping us with organizational restructuring. And this is David Chen from Morrison Legal. They've been advising us on the transition. Transition. As if I were a season changing, something natural and inevitable rather than a person being systematically erased from her own life's work. I stood up slowly, my chair making a soft scraping sound against the hardwood floor. How long have you been planning this? The silence that followed was answer enough. Flashback 5 years earlier. I was standing in almost the same spot, but the energy in the room had been completely different. David was still alive then, his arm around my waist as we celebrated our largest contract to date, a mixed-use development downtown worth $60 million. Victoria had just joined the company and was effusive in her praise. "I can't believe what you've built here, Grace," she'd said, raising her champagne glass. "This company is like your fourth child." David had laughed. "Don't give her any ideas. 3 kids and a construction company are already more than any one person should handle." But Victoria's words had stuck with me. Your fourth child. At the time, I'd been touched by what seemed like genuine admiration. Now, I wondered if she'd been evaluating what she saw as an inheritance that should rightfully be shared. The confrontation continues. "Grace, please sit down," my father said. "Let's discuss this like adults." "Like adults?" I remained standing. Adults have conversations before making decisions that affect other adults' lives. Adults don't ambush their daughters with lawyers and power plays. Victoria fidgeted with her bracelet. "We tried to bring this up with you several times, but you've been so busy with projects. Busy building this company," I interrupted. "Busy working 16-hour days to secure the contracts that keep us profitable. Busy doing what you're now telling me I'm not qualified to do." "That's not what we're saying." My father's voice was taking on the edge it got when he felt cornered. "You're putting words in our mouths." I looked around the room, taking in the legal documents, the carefully prepared presentation materials, the way everyone avoided my eyes. "Did you practice this? Did you rehearse how you were going to tell me that my life's work was being handed to someone else?" "Grace, you're being dramatic," Victoria said. "You act like we're firing you." "You're still going to be." "What I'm going to be," I said quietly, "is leaving this room before I say something we'll all regret." I walked toward the door, my heels clicking against the floor with a precision that masked the chaos in my mind. As I reached for the handle, my father spoke again. "The transition is happening regardless, Grace. The papers are already filed. You can make this easy or difficult, but the outcome is the same." I turned back to look at him. This man who had taught me to love the feel of blueprints between my fingers, who had brought me to construction sites when other fathers were taking their daughters to tea parties, who had once told me I could build anything I could imagine. "The outcome," I said, "is rarely what people expect." That evening, Grace's apartment, my apartment, felt different that night. The view of Lake Michigan that usually calmed me seemed cold and distant. I sat on my kitchen island, staring at a glass of wine I hadn't touched, surrounded by the silence that had become my constant companion since David's death. The phone had been ringing all evening, missed calls from Victoria, from my father, from my mother Margaret, who was undoubtedly calling to smooth things over, the way she'd done my entire life whenever conflict arose in our family. I'd ignored them all. Instead, I found myself pulling out photo albums I hadn't looked at in years. Pictures of me with a hard hat that was too big for my head, standing next to my father at my first job site when I was 16. My graduation from architecture school, where my mother had given me the silver pen that still sat in my desk drawer, engraved with Cherokee building. My wedding to David in the backyard of the house I designed for us. The kids when they were little, covered in mud and laughing at some construction site outing. And then more recent photos. Victoria's welcome party when she joined the company. The two of us at various business functions, her glowing and social while I stood slightly to the side, more comfortable with blueprints than small talk. The Forbes photo shoot where the photographer had kept repositing us because the energy wasn't quite right. I'd always told myself that Victoria's natural charisma complemented my technical skills, that her ability to charm clients and investors was an asset to the company I'd built. I'd never considered that she might see these same qualities as qualifications for taking over entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from my eldest daughter, Emma, who was finishing her residency in Boston. "Mom, Aunt Vic called. Said there was some kind of family meeting. Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Just some business restructuring. Nothing for you to worry about." But even as I typed the words, I knew they weren't true. This wasn't just business restructuring. This was the systematic dismantling of everything I'd built, wrapped in the language of progress and family loyalty. Flashback the early years, I was 28, pregnant with Emma, standing in what would become our first independent project, a small office building on the north side. David was holding the blueprints while I pointed out modifications to the contractor. My father had just started letting me take the lead on smaller projects, and I was determined to prove that his faith in me wasn't misplaced. "You know what I love about you, Grace?" David had said later that night as we ate takeout Chinese food on the floor of our empty apartment. "You don't just see what things are, you see what they could become." At the time, I thought he was talking about buildings. Now I wondered if he'd been talking about me. The discovery 3 days later, I hadn't been back to the office. I'd called in sick, something I hadn't done in over a decade, and spent the time trying to process what had happened. My mother had stopped by twice, each time bearing casseroles and well-meaning but ultimately useless advice about letting time heal these wounds. "You girls have always been competitive," she'd said on her second visit, settling herself on my couch with the familiarity of someone who'd raised me in this same assertive manner. "Remember when Victoria wanted to play piano because you did? This is just an adult version of that." I'd wanted to scream that this wasn't sibling rivalry over piano lessons. This was my career, my identity, my life's work. But Margaret Reynolds had perfected the art of diminishing conflict by treating it as something smaller than it was, and I'd learned long ago that arguments with my mother were unwinnable. On Thursday evening, I finally forced myself to go to my home office to tackle the pile of personal paperwork I'd been avoiding. Bills, insurance documents, tax records, the mundane maintenance of adult life that continues regardless of personal catastrophe. That's when I found it. Tucked into a folder labeled Legal Documents Miscellaneous was a manila envelope I didn't remember filing. Inside were the original incorporation papers for Reynolds Construction, documents from when my father had first started the company 40 years ago, long before I'd been old enough to understand what any of it meant. But clipped to the back were amendments and modifications that had been filed over the years. And there, in the section marked Ownership Structure, I found something that made my hands shake as I held the pages up to the light. According to the documents in front of me, I own 62% of Reynolds Construction. I read the numbers again, certain I was making a mistake. But there it was, in legal language that was perfectly clear once you parsed through the jargon. A series of stock transfers and equity adjustments that had been made over the years, often tied to major investments or expansion decisions. Each time the company had needed capital for growth, I'd been the one to provide it, sometimes through traditional loans, sometimes through personal investments, sometimes by deferring my own salary to keep cash flow positive during lean periods. The lawyers my father had brought to that meeting, the confidence with which he declared that the papers were already filed, none of it mattered if he didn't actually have the legal authority to transfer power in the first place. I thought about calling Victoria, about confronting my father, about marching into the office and demanding an explanation. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Michael Thornton. The consultation, Michael Thornton had been my business law professor at Northwestern and had remained a friend and occasional advisor over the years. He'd handled the legal work when David and I bought our first house, had reviewed contracts for major construction projects, and had been one of the few people who truly understood David's death had left me with not just emotional grief, but practical concerns about protecting everything we'd built together. His office in the Loop was exactly as I remembered it. Walls lined with law books he'd probably actually read, a desk cluttered with the organized chaos of someone who thought better surrounded by paper than staring at empty spaces. "Grace," he said as his secretary showed me in, "I have to admit, I was surprised to get your call. You sounded intense." I sat across from his desk and pulled the folder from my bag. "Michael, I need you to look at these documents and tell me if I'm reading them correctly." He accepted the papers with the cautious expression lawyers get when they sense they're about to be pulled into something complicated. For 10 minutes, he read in silence, occasionally making notes on a legal pad or referring to something on his computer screen. Finally, he looked up. "Grace, where did you get these?" "From my own files. They were with my personal papers." "Have you shown them to anyone else?" "No." "Are they? Are they what I think they are?" Michael leaned back in his chair. "Well, if these documents are legitimate, and I have no reason to think they're not, then you are indeed the majority shareholder of Reynolds Construction. By a significant margin." I felt something inside my chest loosen for the first time in days. So the board meeting, the transition announcement, and none of that was legal? Not if you didn't consent to it, no. He set the papers down carefully. Grace, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Did your father ever ask you to sign any documents related to succession planning or ownership transfer? I thought back over the years, trying to remember. There had been so many legal documents over the decades: insurance policies, contract authorizations, routine business filings. I don't think so. Not specifically about ownership. I paused. Why? Because what your father announced isn't just unethical if done without your consent, it's illegal. If he's been representing to investors, board members, or business partners that he has authority he doesn't actually possess, that's fraud. The word hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Fraud. My father, who had taught me to measure twice and cut once, who had instilled in me a respect for precision and honesty in all things, had potentially committed fraud. What are my options? I asked. Michael was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. Grace, I've known you for 25 years. You're not a vindictive person, but you have every right to protect what you've built. The question is, what do you want the outcome to be? I stood and walked to his window, which looked out over the Chicago River. Below, construction crews were working on a new bridge, tiny figures in hard hats moving with purpose across the steel framework. It reminded me of why I'd fallen in love with building in the first place: the satisfaction of creating something permanent, something that would outlast you, something that mattered. I want, I said slowly, for the truth to be known. I want the people who believe my father's narrative to understand what actually happened. And I want to ensure that this company I've spent 30 years building doesn't get destroyed by people who see it as a political prize instead of a responsibility. When I turned back to Michael, he was already reaching for his phone. Then let's make sure that happens. Building the case. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal documents, financial records, and strategic planning. Michael had brought in a colleague who specialized in corporate governance, a sharp woman named Lisa Chen who had the unsettling ability to reduce complex emotional situations to their legal essentials. Your father's position is going to be that these ownership percentages don't reflect the current reality of company operations, she explained during one of our meetings. He'll argue that while you may technically own a majority stake, your sister has been the operational face of the company and therefore deserves to lead it. But that's not how ownership works, I protested. No, it's not. But family business disputes are rarely about legal technicalities. They're about narratives. And right now, your family is telling a story in which you're the talented but outdated older sister who needs to step aside for the sake of progress. So what story do we tell? Lisa smiled, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like I might have allies who understood the stakes. We tell the truth, but we tell it strategically. As we built our case, a clear picture emerged of what had been happening over the past 5 years. Victoria hadn't just been marketing the company. She'd been positioning herself as its future. She'd cultivated relationships with board members, had gradually taken over external communications, and had been subtly crediting herself with successes that had been collaborative efforts. The Forbes article that my father had mentioned? It had been based on a sustainability initiative I developed, but Victoria had been the one quoted throughout. The Chicago public school contract she'd supposedly negotiated? I'd done the technical proposals and project planning. She'd handled the final presentation. None of it was technically dishonest. Victoria had been involved in these projects. But the way the achievements had been framed had gradually created a narrative in which she was the visionary and I was merely the implementer. It's actually quite sophisticated, Michael observed. If someone were going to plan a corporate takeover, this is exactly how they'd do it. Build a public profile, establish credibility with key stakeholders, then position the transition as a natural evolution rather than a coup. The word coup made me laugh, though there was no humor in it. You're talking about my family, Michael. My sister. My father. Not some corporate raiders. Grace, he said gently. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals come from the people we trust most. The counterattack begins. the annual Chicago Architecture Foundation Gala was held every April at the Art Institute. For the past 15 years, Reynolds Construction had been one of the major sponsors. Victoria had called me personally to invite me, her voice bright and cheerful as if nothing had changed between us. It would mean so much to have you there, Grace. As a family. Especially since we'll be announcing some exciting developments for the company. I accepted the invitation, though I doubt Victoria understood why. The ballroom was filled with the usual crowd of architects, developers, city planners, journalists, and the wealthy patrons who funded various cultural institutions. I arrived alone, wearing a black dress that David had bought me for our 20th anniversary, and immediately felt the subtle shift in how people greeted me. Where once conversations had been about upcoming projects or design innovations, now people seemed cautious, unsure. I heard fragments of conversations that stopped when I approached. Transition at Reynolds. New leadership direction. Heard Grace is taking a consulting role. Victoria worked the room like a politician, radiant in a red dress that wouldn't have looked out of place at a presidential inauguration. She had our father on one arm and a cluster of admirers following her from group to group. Watching her, I had to admit she was good at this part of the business. She remembered names, asked about people's children, made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. I ordered a drink and found a spot near the windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, content to observe rather than participate. That's when David Chen, the lawyer who'd been in that ambush meeting 2 weeks ago, approached me. Ms. Reynolds, he said, extending his hand. I'm glad you decided to join us tonight. I wouldn't have missed it. He seemed to be waiting for me to say something else, and when I didn't, he cleared his throat. I hope you know that the transition we discussed was nothing personal. Your father and sister have tremendous respect for your contributions to the company. Mr. Chen, I said, setting down my drink. Do you know what I've learned in 30 years of construction? He looked uncertain but shook his head. Foundation problems don't fix themselves. They get worse over time until eventually, the whole structure becomes unstable. I smiled pleasantly. You might want to keep that in mind. I excused myself and made my way toward the stage where the evening's program was about to begin. As I passed Victoria, she grabbed my arm. Grace, I'm so glad you came. Listen, I know things have been awkward between us, but I really hope we can work through this together. As a family. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. Victoria, do you remember when we were kids and you used to take my toys and then act surprised when I got upset? Her grip loosened. What's that supposed to mean? It means some patterns are hard to break. I gently removed her hand from my arm. But some of us eventually learn to stop leaving our toys where they can be stolen. The revelation. The program began with the usual acknowledgments and awards. I half listened to speeches about innovation in sustainable design and the importance of public-private partnerships. But when the foundation's president took the microphone to announce the evening's major sponsor spotlight, my attention snapped back to the present. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce the CEO of Reynolds Construction, one of Chicago's most respected firms and a leader in sustainable building practices. Please welcome Victoria Reynolds. The applause was enthusiastic as Victoria made her way to the stage. She looked confident, prepared, every inch the successful executive she'd worked so hard to become. As she adjusted the microphone, I noticed she was holding a folder that looked familiar. Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here representing Reynolds Construction at this incredible celebration of architectural excellence. Her voice carried clearly through the ballroom, warm and engaging. As many of you know, my family's company has been part of the Chicago building community for 4 decades. I stopped listening to the words and started watching the room. Board members from our company were scattered throughout the audience, smiling and nodding approvingly. Potential clients and partners were paying close attention, clearly impressed by Victoria's presentation. This wasn't just a sponsorship acknowledgement, it was a coming out party, a formal introduction of Victoria as the face of Reynolds Construction. Which is why I'm excited to announce that Reynolds Construction will be entering a new phase of growth and innovation, Victoria continued. Over the next 12 months, we'll be expanding our operations significantly, taking on larger projects and pioneering new approaches to sustainable development. She paused, and I noticed her glance toward our father in the audience before continuing. Of course, none of this would be possible without the incredible foundation built by my father and my sister Grace over the years. Grace taught me that good building starts with solid fundamentals. The mention of my name drew some scattered applause, the kind you give to someone being honored in absentia. I realized that in Victoria's narrative, I was already past tense, someone who had contributed to where the company was now, but wouldn't be part of where it was going. That's when I stood up. The movement was subtle at first, just someone rising from her seat near the back of the room. But as I began walking toward the stage, conversations quieted. Victoria noticed the shift in the audience's attention and looked up, her eyes widening when she saw me approaching. I didn't hurry. I walked with the same steady pace I'd used to navigate construction sites for 30 years, my heels clicking against the marble floor with metronomic precision. By the time I reached the steps leading to the stage, the ballroom was completely silent. Grace? Victoria's voice carried uncertainty now. Were you planning to say something? I mounted the steps and stood beside her at the podium. Up close, I could see the slight tremor in her hands as she held the microphone. May I? I asked, gesturing toward the mic. She hesitated for a moment that felt like an hour, then handed it over. I looked out at the audience, 500 people who represented the professional community I'd been part of my entire adult life. Some of them knew me well, others knew me only by reputation. All of them were waiting to see what would happen next. Good evening, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'm Grace Reynolds, and I founded Reynolds Construction 30 years ago. The silence in the room was absolute. My sister just told you that I taught her that good building starts with solid fundamentals. She's right about that. But what she didn't mention is that good building also requires understanding who owns the foundation you're building on. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder, the same type of folder Victoria had been holding, but containing very different documents. You see, there seems to have been some confusion recently about who actually runs Reynolds Construction. So in the interest of clarity, and because I believe in transparency in all business dealings, I'd like to share some information with you. Victoria stepped closer to me, her voice low but audible to the front tables. Grace, what are you doing? I turned to look at her, this woman who had been my sister for 50 years and my business partner for 5. I'm correcting the record, Victoria. I opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is the current ownership structure of Reynolds Construction, filed with the state of Illinois and verified by our legal counsel as of yesterday. I held the document up high enough that the people in the front rows could see it was official: signatures, seals, the formal trappings of legal authority. According to this document and according to every relevant legal precedent, I own 62% of Reynolds Construction. I didn't inherit this position. I earned it through decades of investment, both financial and personal. I built this company from the ground up, project by project, client by client. The murmur that ran through the room was like wind through tall grass, starting soft and building to a rustle of whispered conversations. Now, some of you may have heard recently that I was stepping back from active leadership of the company, that my sister was taking over as CEO while I assumed a more supportive role. I paused, making eye contact with several board members who were now looking distinctly uncomfortable. I want to be clear that no such transition has occurred, nor has one been authorized by me as the majority shareholder. Victoria's face had gone pale. Grace, you're making a scene. This isn't the place. You're right, I said, turning back to the microphone. This isn't the place for family disputes, but it is the place for business transparency. And the business truth is this: any representations that have been made about changes in Reynolds Construction's leadership were made without my knowledge or consent. I saw my father in the audience, his face a mask of anger and embarrassment. Around him, people were turning to look at him, then back at me, trying to piece together what they were witnessing. I want to thank all of you for your continued support of Reynolds Construction over the years. We have exciting projects ahead of us, and I look forward to working with many of you as we move forward. Under my leadership. The emphasis on those last 3 words was slight but unmistakable. I handed the microphone back to Victoria, whose hands were now visibly shaking. Thank you for letting me clarify that. I said, loud enough for the front tables to hear. I didn't want there to be any confusion about who's responsible for the company's future direction. As I walked off the stage, the ballroom erupted into conversation. I didn't look back, but I could feel hundreds of eyes following my exit. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them understand that Grace Reynolds wasn't disappearing quietly into the background. The aftermath. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Victoria, my father, board members, clients who had heard about the previous night's events, journalists who had been at the gala and sensed a story worth pursuing. I ignored most of them. But I did call Michael Thornton. Well, he said when he picked up, I see you decided to go with the direct approach. Was that a mistake? That depends on what you want to achieve, he said. If you wanted to maintain family harmony while quietly asserting your legal rights, then yes, probably a mistake. But if you wanted to make it impossible for your father and sister to continue their narrative about voluntary succession, then it was brilliant. I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold in front of me, watching the morning joggers along the lakefront through my window. Michael, I need to know something. Last night, when I made that announcement, was I protecting my company or destroying my family? Grace, he said gently, I think your family destroyed itself when they decided to cut you out of your own life's work. You just refused to pretend it wasn't happening. An hour later, Victoria appeared at my door. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside to let her enter. She walked to my living room and stood looking out at the lake, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold despite the warm April morning. Grace, I need you to help me understand something, she said without turning around. Last night, you humiliated me in front of the entire Chicago architecture community. You made me look like a fraud, a thief, a liar. So help me understand, was that about protecting your business interests? Or was it about punishing me for wanting something you thought was only yours? I sat down on my couch, suddenly feeling every one of my 52 years. Victoria, can I ask you something? When did I become the enemy? She turned to face me then, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't expected, a genuine pain. You were never the enemy, Grace. But you were never really my sister either. What does that mean? It means, she said, sitting down across from me, that for as long as I can remember, I've been Grace's little sister. The pretty one. The social one. The one who was good at things that didn't really matter. Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life hearing about how brilliant and capable and impressive your older sister is? I stared at her. Victoria, you're an MBA from Kellogg. You've run successful marketing campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. You're brilliant in your own right, but not at the things that matter to Dad. Not at building things. Not at creating something lasting. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When I joined Reynolds Construction, I thought finally I could contribute to something meaningful. Something that would outlast me. And I was good at it, Grace. You know I was good at it. You were, I admitted. You brought skills to the company that I don't have. But it was still your company. Your legacy. And no matter how much I contributed, I would always be the add-on, the supporting player in the Grace Reynolds story. We sat in silence for a moment, and I found myself thinking about all the times over the years when I'd casually mentioned Victoria's contributions as supplements to the real work of construction. How I'd introduced her at industry events as my sister who handles our marketing, rather than as a partner or executive. Victoria, I said slowly, I think I owe you an apology. She looked surprised. For what? For not seeing you as an equal partner. For treating you like a helpful addition instead of recognizing that you brought something essential to the company. I paused. But that doesn't excuse what happened 2 weeks ago. Her face hardened again. What happened 2 weeks ago was Dad's idea. But you went along with it. Yes, I went along with it. Because for the first time in my life, someone was telling me that I could be the leader instead of the follower. That I could build something instead of just supporting someone else's vision. I stood up and walked to the window, watching a construction crew working on a new high-rise across the street. Victoria, Do you know why I never made you a full partner in the company? Because you didn't trust me to run it as well as you could. No, I said, turning back to her. Because I was afraid that if I gave you equal power, you'd realize you didn't need me anymore. And this company was all I had left of Dad's approval, of my identity, of the life David and I built together. I didn't want to share it because I was afraid of losing it entirely. She was quiet for a long moment. So we were both afraid. Apparently so. She stood up and moved toward the door, then stopped. Grace, what happens now? After last night, I don't think Dad and I can just go back to working under your leadership as if nothing happened. I had been dreading this question because I didn't have a good answer. I don't know, Victoria. I really don't know. Maybe, she said softly. It's time for both of us to build something new. Flashback the foundation. I was 8 years old, standing in the basement of our house on a Saturday morning, holding a level while my father measured the foundation walls. He'd been worried about some minor settling and wanted to check the structural integrity himself rather than hiring it out. Grace, honey, do you see this crack here? He pointed to a hairline fracture in the concrete. Is it bad? I asked, suddenly afraid that our house might collapse. Not necessarily. But if we ignore it, it will get bigger. And if it gets big enough, it could eventually compromise the whole structure. He smiled at me. The good news is that foundation problems can almost always be fixed if you catch them early and you're willing to do the work. How do you fix them? Well, sometimes you can patch them. Sometimes you have to rebuild sections. And sometimes, he said, tapping the wall thoughtfully, you have to tear down and start over. The key is being honest about which situation you're dealing with. 2 weeks later, I was in Michael's office again, this time with Victoria and my father. The atmosphere was strained but civil. We'd all agreed that screaming at each other wouldn't solve anything, and we needed to find a way forward that wouldn't destroy what 3 generations had built. Let me make sure I understand everyone's position correctly, Michael said, consulting his notes. Grace, as majority shareholder, you want to maintain ultimate authority over the company's direction. Robert, you believe the company would benefit from new leadership but acknowledge that the way you attempted to implement this change was legally problematic. Victoria, you want a meaningful leadership role but understand that claiming the CEO position without shareholder approval was inappropriate. We all nodded, though my father looked like he was biting into something sour. Here's what I propose, Michael continued. A structured transition plan that acknowledges both legal realities and business needs. He slid 3 copies of a document across the table. Grace retains her majority ownership and chairman position. Victoria becomes president and coup, with significant operational authority but ultimate accountability to the board. Robert transitions to chairman emeritus, providing advisory input but removing himself from day-to-day operations. What about CEO? Victoria asked. That position would be eliminated for now, Michael said. Instead, you'd have dual leadership, Grace focusing on strategic vision and major project development, Victoria handling operations and business development. All major decisions would require consensus between the two of you. My father opened his mouth to object, but Michael held up a hand. Before anyone responds, let me be clear about why this structure makes sense. Grace, you get to maintain control over the company you built while acknowledging Victoria's contributions and capabilities. Victoria, you get real authority and the opportunity to prove yourself as a leader. Robert, you get to step back gracefully while ensuring the company remains in family hands. I looked at Victoria, who was studying the documents intently. What happens if we can't reach consensus on major decisions? Then you exercise your authority as majority shareholder, Michael said. But the hope is that you'll operate as true partners, with mutual respect for each other's strengths. Victoria looked up. And if this dual leadership structure doesn't work, then in 2 years, we revisit the arrangement. If you've proven yourself as a leader and Grace is comfortable with the transition, we can discuss a change in ownership structure. If not, Grace maintains her current position. It wasn't perfect. It didn't address all the hurt feelings or the trust that had been broken, but it was a framework for moving forward that acknowledged everyone's needs and rights. There's one more thing, I said. I want Victoria to have equity in the company. Real ownership, not just a management role. My father looked startled. Grace, the family ownership structure needs to reflect reality, I interrupted. Victoria has contributed to this company's success for 5 years. She deserves to have a stake in its future. Victoria stared at me. You're serious? 20%, I said. Earned over 3 years based on performance metrics we agree on together. If this partnership works, you should be rewarded for making it work. Michael smiled. I think that's a very reasonable proposal. My father was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. I suppose I should apologize to both of you. I thought I was doing what was best for the company, but I went about it all wrong. Dad, Victoria said gently. You were trying to help me. I appreciate that, even if the method was problematic. I was trying to help both of you, he said. I could see that you, Grace, were burning yourself out trying to do everything alone. And I could see that Victoria had talents that weren't being fully utilized. I should have brought you both into the conversation instead of making decisions behind closed doors. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We all made mistakes, Dad. The question is what we do going forward. 6 months later, the Chicago Tribune business section featured a small article with the headline, Reynolds Construction Announces Expansion into Green Technology. The piece included quotes from both Victoria and me about our new partnership and our plans for sustainable development initiatives. I was reading it over breakfast when my phone rang. It was Emma, calling from Boston. Mom, I saw the article. You and Aunt Vic are really making this work? We're trying, I said. It's not always easy, but we're learning to trust each other again. I'm proud of you, she said. Dad would be proud too. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table thinking about David and what he would make of everything that had happened. He'd always been better at family dynamics than I was, better at seeing the emotional undercurrents that I missed while focusing on technical problems. I think he would have understood why Victoria felt overlooked, why my father felt the need to intervene, why I felt betrayed by people I trusted. And I think he would have been proud that we'd found a way to rebuild rather than simply demolish what had been damaged. The partnership with Victoria was working better than I'd expected. Her strengths in client relations and strategic planning complemented my technical expertise and project management skills. We'd already secured 2 major contracts that neither of us could have won alone, or one because of my reputation for complex engineering solutions, the other because of Victoria's ability to present our vision in a way that excited investors. More importantly, we were learning to communicate. Weekly one-on-one meetings where we talked not just about business metrics but about our concerns, our ideas, our frustrations. Monthly dinners where we tried to rebuild our relationship as sisters, not just business partners. My father had been true to his word about stepping back, though he still came by the office occasionally to check on projects he'd been involved with. He seemed more relaxed now, less burdened by the daily decisions that had consumed him for 40 years. 1 year later, the dedication. The children's wing at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was almost complete. I stood in what would become the main playroom, surrounded by the controlled chaos of finished work painters, electricians, flooring installers, all working with the focused intensity that comes with nearing a project's completion. Victoria appeared in the doorway, picking her way carefully around extension cords and paint cans. Grace, the hospital administrator wants to do a walkthrough with us tomorrow morning. I nodded, making a note in my project book. How's the media coordination going? Good. The Tribune wants to do a feature on women-led construction companies, and Midwest Living is interested in a piece about healing architecture. She paused. They want to interview both of us. A year ago, that might have bothered me, the assumption that our story was noteworthy because we were women, because we were sisters, because we'd overcome some kind of family drama to work together. Now I accepted it as part of the reality of running a business in 2025. Victoria, I said, setting down my clipboard, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? I mean, actually happy with how things have worked out. She considered the question seriously. Most of the time, yes. I feel like I'm building something that matters, and I feel like my contributions are valued. There are still moments when I wonder what it would have been like to run my own company from the start, but she shrugged. This is good. This works. And us? As sisters, we're different than we used to be. Maybe better different. She smiled. We're more honest with each other now. Before, I think we both spent a lot of energy pretending things were fine when they weren't. I walked to the window that looked out over the hospital's existing buildings. In a few months, children would be playing in this room while their parents dealt with medical crises. The space we'd created would be part of their story, a place where healing happened not just through medical intervention, but through the simple act of having a beautiful, comfortable place to exist during difficult times. Victoria, I want you to know that I'm grateful we figured this out. Not just the business part, but the family part. Me too, she said. Though I have to admit, I never thought my midlife crisis would involve nearly destroying my relationship with my sister over a construction company. I laughed. Is that what this was? A midlife crisis, what would you call it? I thought about it. Growing pains. Very delayed growing pains. Present day the speech. Which brings me back to where I started standing at the podium of the Peninsula Hotel, having just announced to 500 people that I owned the company my father and sister had tried to take from me. As I walked off that stage a year ago, I thought I was ending a story. I thought I was drawing a final line that said, this far and no further. But endings, I've learned, are rarely as clean as we want them to be. And sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. The woman who walked off that stage was someone who had fought for what was hers and won. But the woman who lived through the year that followed learned that winning isn't the same as succeeding, and that the most important victories are the ones where everyone gets to keep their dignity. This morning, I received an email from a young woman named Sarah Chen, not my former assistant, but a recent architecture school graduate who had seen the Tribune article about our company. She wanted to know if we had any internship opportunities, specifically because she was interested in working for a firm where women could build something lasting together rather than in spite of each other. I forwarded her resume to Victoria with a note. What do you think? Could we use another builder? Victoria's response came back within the hour. Absolutely. Let's interview her next week. And Grace? I still can't believe we almost destroyed this because we were too proud to talk to each other. I can't believe it either. But I'm grateful we found our way back to each other before it was too late. Building something worthwhile, whether it's a hospital wing or a family relationship or a business partnership, requires the same skills: patience, precision, a willingness to tear down what isn't working and start over when necessary, and most importantly, the ability to trust that the foundation will hold even when everything above ground needs to be rebuilt. I've spent 30 years building structures that will outlast me. But the thing I'm most proud of building is the partnership Victoria and I have created, one that acknowledges both our individual strengths and our shared commitment to creating something meaningful together. My father was right about foundation problems. They don't fix themselves. They get worse over time if ignored. And sometimes you have to tear down and start over. What he didn't mention is that rebuilding can result in something stronger than what was there before, especially when you're willing to do the work together. So to answer the question that young woman asked in her email, yes, women can build something lasting together. But it requires the same thing all good construction requires: honest assessment of what you're working with, clear communication about what you're trying to achieve, and the patience to do the work right, even when it would be easier to just tear everything down and walk away. I'm Grace Reynolds. I built a company, lost it, fought for it, and ultimately learned to share it. In 52 years into my life, I'm finally building the thing I'm most proud of. A future where my legacy isn't just about what I created alone, but about what I was able to create in partnership with someone I love. That's a foundation I'm confident will last. The forged signature stared back at me from the notarized document, my name written in handwriting that wasn't mine. 3 months of my life had led to this moment of sitting in a lawyer's office, holding proof that my own family had erased me from existence, legally and deliberately. I set the document down on Robert Harrison's mahogany desk and looked up at the silver-haired attorney who had been waiting 15 years for me to walk through his door. So, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, where do we begin? But to understand how I got here to this moment of reckoning, you need to know about the morning it all started to unravel. The morning my mother threw scalding soup across my face and told me to get out of the house I had helped pay for. Flashback. The breaking point: 3 months earlier, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before my alarm. The house was quiet in that heavy way that meant everyone was still asleep, but something felt different. Wrong. I lay there listening to the familiar sounds, the old furnace clicking on, the neighbor's dog barking its morning routine, the distant hum of early commuters on Highway 50. My name is Margaret Williams. I'm 52 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've been the backbone of Campbell Market, the grocery store my father built from nothing in 1973. I have a degree in business management, a head for numbers that my father always admired, and until that morning, I believed I had a family that valued what I brought to the table. I was wrong. I patted downstairs in my socks, the hardwood floors cool against my feet. The kitchen still smelled faintly of last night's garlic bread and the lemon oil I used to clean the counters. Twice. I had cleaned them twice, not because they needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands while Patricia, my mother, explained why Jessica, her stepdaughter, would be joining the family business in a more official capacity. That phrase had echoed in my head all night. Official capacity. As if the 15 years I'd spent rebuilding the store after Dad's stroke, modernizing the inventory system, securing the contracts that kept us afloat during the recession, as if none of that had been official enough. I started the kettle for tea. Patricia always got the coffee machine. That had been established years ago. I was buttering toast when I heard her slippers shuffling against the stairs. She appeared in the doorway wearing her faded blue housecoat, her gray hair pinned back with bobby pins that had seen better decades. Behind her glasses, her eyes were already sharp and calculating. It was 7:15 a.m., and she was ready for battle. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She didn't respond, just sat at the kitchen table and waited for me to serve her. I set down her oatmeal bowl, the blue ceramic one she'd used for as long as I could remember, and poured her orange juice. The routine was so automatic, I could have done it blindfolded. "Jessica will be here at 10, she said without preamble. "She needs your car today." I froze, my spoon halfway to my mouth. "My car? You work from home now. You don't need it during the week." She spooned oatmeal into her mouth, chewed loudly. "And she'll need your credit card. Just until she gets on her feet with the business." The business. Our family's grocery store had become the business, and somehow I wasn't part of it anymore. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not giving her my car or my credit card." Patricia's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "Don't be selfish, Margaret. Family helps family." "I've been helping," I said, setting down my spoon. "I've been helping for 15 years. I helped when Dad had his stroke. I helped when we almost lost the store in 2008. I helped when you needed the mortgage payments. I think I've helped enough." She stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "You think you're better than her, don't you? With your college degree and your fancy computer work. Jessica is trying to build something. You're just hoarding what you have." I kept my voice level, though my heart was racing. "I'm not hoarding anything. I'm trying to survive. And I'm trying to protect what Dad built." "What Dad built?" Her voice rose to a pitch I knew meant danger. "You mean what I built? What I've been building since he died. You think because you went to Sacramento State for 4 years you understand business better than I do? I think," I said carefully, "that I've been running the day-to-day operations of Campbell Market for 15 years. I think I've earned the right to have a say in what happens to it." She picked up the soup pot from the stove. For a second, I thought she was just clearing dishes. Then I saw the look in her eyes, the same look she used to get when she caught students cheating in her high school math class. Before I could react, the soup was already in the air. It was mushroom barley, still hot from last night's dinner. It hit my left cheek and shoulder, soaking through my blouse and burning like hellfire. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the realization that crashed over me at the same moment. My own mother had just assaulted me. In our kitchen. Over a car and a credit card I wasn't willing to hand over to her stepdaughter. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, soup dripping down my collar, staring at the woman who had given birth to me, who was now glaring at me like I was a stranger who had broken into her house. Give Jessica everything she needs, Patricia said, her voice deadly calm now. Or get out. I turned and walked upstairs. Behind me, I heard the garage door opening. Perfect timing. Jessica's white SUV pulling into the driveway just as I was being exiled from my own home. Flashback. The inheritance that never was. I need to tell you about my father, David Campbell, because understanding him is crucial to understanding why what happened next mattered so much. Dad was a quiet man who believed in hard work and keeping your word. He'd grown up during the Depression, the son of a factory worker who lost his job in 1932 and never quite recovered. When Dad married my mother in 1970, he promised her they'd never be poor, never be at the mercy of other people's whims. He kept that promise. Campbell Market opened in 1973 with one checkout counter, 2 employees, and a dream. Dad worked 16-hour days, learning every aspect of the business from inventory management to customer service. By the time I graduated high school in 1990, we had 4 full-time employees and were the go-to grocery store for our part of Sacramento. When Dad had a stroke in 2009, I was 29 and working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. I took a leave of absence to help with the store, thinking it would be temporary. 15 years later, I was still there. Dad lived for 3 more years after the stroke, long enough to see me modernize our inventory system, negotiate better deals with suppliers, and increase our annual revenue by 30%. Long enough to pull me aside one afternoon and say, "Maggie, I need you to promise me something. Whatever happens, don't let them take what we built. The store is yours. I've made sure of it." He died on a Tuesday in March 2012. Patricia found his will a week later. In my room, I packed light. 1 overnight bag with the essentials, 2 changes of clothes, my laptop, my phone charger, and the few things in that house that were truly mine. At the bottom of my dresser drawer, wrapped in tissue paper, I found the handkerchief my father had embroidered for my 15th birthday. His handwriting in blue thread. "I see you, Maggie. Always." I folded it carefully and tucked it into my jacket pocket. The house was quiet when I came back downstairs. Through the window, I could see Patricia and Jessica in the driveway, their heads bent together in conversation. Jessica was nodding sympathetically, one hand on Patricia's arm, playing the role of the dutiful daughter, the role I had never been allowed to play. I walked to my car without looking back. The soup had dried sticky on my blouse, but my spine was straight. I had spent 34 years in that house, and I was leaving with one bag and a car that wouldn't be mine much longer. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. In my laptop bag was a thumb drive containing 15 years of financial records, employee files, supplier contracts, and customer databases. Information that Jessica and Patricia didn't know existed. Information that would become very important in the weeks to come. The discovery, 2 hours later, I was sitting in the parking lot of a Starbucks, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The left side of my face was red and blotchy where the soup had hit. My hair was still damp at the roots. I looked like a woman who had been crying, though I hadn't shed a single tear. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Mitchell, my former colleague from the accounting firm and the only person who had stayed in touch after I left to work at the store full-time. "Sarah, saw your mom and Jessica at the bank this morning. Looked official. Everything okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Me. Can we meet?" "Something's happened." Sarah. "Coffee shop on J Street in an hour?" Me. "I'll be there." Sarah was already waiting when I arrived, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the same concerned expression she'd had when she helped me through Dad's illness. She took one look at my face and said, "Jesus, Maggie. What happened?" I told her everything. The conversation that morning, the soup, the ultimatum. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "There's something else," she said when I finished. "Something I probably should have told you sooner." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I've been keeping this for you. I wasn't sure if you'd ever need it, but..." Inside the envelope was a document I'd never seen before. A notarized agreement titled Asset Consolidation Transfer, dated 6 months ago. According to the papers, I had signed over my interest in Campbell Market to Patricia Williams, effective immediately. Except I had never signed any such document. The signature at the bottom of the page looked like mine from a distance, but I could see the differences. The way the M in Margaret slanted too far to the right. The W in Williams that ended with a flourish I never used. Where did you get this? I asked. Jessica brought it to the bank where I work, Sarah said. She needed it notarized for some kind of business loan application. The notary she brought with her didn't even check IDs, just stamped it and left. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They forged my signature. That's what I thought too. But I wasn't sure how to tell you, or if I even should. You should have, I said, but without anger. You absolutely should have. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what this meant settling between us. Then Sarah reached for her phone. I still have a key to your storage unit, she said. The one you rented when you moved back home to take care of your dad. Did you ever clean it out? I shook my head. After Dad died, I had been too overwhelmed with grief and the demands of running the store to deal with the boxes of his papers and my old belongings stored in that climate-controlled unit across town. Maybe it's time, Sarah said. Flashback. The man who saw it coming. The storage unit smelled like cardboard and forgotten time. Sarah and I had to move 3 boxes of Christmas decorations before we could reach what I was looking for. The wooden crate I had packed with Dad's most important papers after he died. Inside, beneath bank statements and old tax returns, I found the original ledger from Campbell Market. Dad had kept it by hand for the first 10 years, every sale and expense recorded in his careful cursive. My name appeared for the first time in 1995 when I helped out during summer breaks from college. By 2009, most of the entries were in my handwriting. But that wasn't the most important thing in the crate. At the very bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag, was an envelope with my name on it in Dad's handwriting. The envelope was sealed, but the paper was yellowed at the edges. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter dated 2 weeks before Dad's stroke and a business card for Robert Harrison, attorney at law. Maggie, the letter read, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong with the store or the family. I hope I'm being paranoid, but I've learned that hope doesn't protect what matters most. Mr. Harrison has been my attorney for 20 years. He knows about the real will, the one Patricia doesn't know exists. He has copies of everything, the ownership documents, the business plans, the evidence of all the work you've done to save Campbell Market. If anyone tries to take what's yours, don't fight them alone. Go to him. Trust him like you trusted me. The next morning, Sarah and I drove to downtown Sacramento to find Robert Harrison. His office was in a brick building squeezed between a dental practice and a tax preparation service. The waiting room had the quiet elegance of old money and established reputation. Harrison himself was in his early 70s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When he heard my name, he didn't look surprised. Margaret Campbell, he said, extending his hand. I've been expecting you for quite some time. He led us into his private office and pulled a thick file from a locked cabinet behind his desk. The label read Campbell, David, Estate Planning and Business Succession. Your father was a careful man, Harrison said, opening the file. He came to see me in 2010, about a year after his stroke. He was concerned about what might happen to the business if something happened to him, and he was particularly worried about your mother's relationship with Jessica. He pulled out a document I recognized as Dad's will, but it was different from the version Patricia had probated. This one was longer, more detailed, and contained clauses I had never seen before. According to this version of your father's will, Harrison continued, you inherit not just his share of Campbell Market, but controlling interest in the business, provided you remain actively involved in its management, which you have for the past 15 years. I stared at the document, my father's signature clear and confident at the bottom. Why didn't this come out when he died? Because your mother found and filed a different will first. An earlier version from 2008 that didn't include these provisions. She probably didn't even know this one existed. Sarah leaned forward. Is that legal? Can you just file whichever will you want? Harrison's expression was grim. It's fraud. And combined with this forged asset transfer document you've brought me, we have grounds for both civil and criminal charges. I felt something shift inside me, like a gear clicking into place. For 3 months, I had been reacting to what Patricia and Jessica were doing to me. Now, for the first time, I was going to act. What do we do next? I asked. We gather evidence, Harrison said. And then we go to war. The investigation begins. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in a sort of limbo. I had rented a small apartment across town, furnished it with the bare minimum from IKEA and secondhand stores. I worked my remote bookkeeping job during the day, and in the evenings, Sarah and I built our case. The first breakthrough came from Emma Rodriguez, a young woman who had worked at Campbell Market during college and was now finishing her graduate degree in business administration. I hadn't spoken to Emma in 2 years, but when I reached out to her, she responded immediately. I was wondering when someone would ask me about this, she said when we met at a coffee shop near UC Davis. I've been keeping screenshots of emails for months. Emma's evidence was devastating. She showed me dozens of emails between Jessica and Patricia discussing how to transition Margaret out of active management and prepare the business for new leadership. There were drafts of press releases announcing Jessica as the new general manager of Campbell Market, written weeks before I was forced out. There were Facebook posts crediting Jessica with programs and initiatives I had developed. Most damaging of all was an email from Patricia to Jessica from just 2 days before the soup incident. M is becoming a problem. Talk to lawyer about forcing her out. Best option is to make home situation untenable. She'll leave on her own, and then we can proceed with business transfer. They planned this, I said, staring at the screen of Emma's phone. They planned all of it. Emma nodded. The worst part is how they're rewriting history. They uploaded a whole photo album to Facebook last week showing Jessica building the business. Half those photos are from events you organized. Would you be willing to testify about this? I asked. Absolutely. I've been waiting for someone to ask. The second breakthrough came from my own laptop. Going through 5 years of email correspondence, I found proof that I had been the primary point of contact for all of Campbell Market's major suppliers, had negotiated all the contracts personally, and had been the one dealing with the bank on the business loans. Jessica's name appeared nowhere in the official business communications. But the third breakthrough was the most personal, and it came from an unexpected source. The truth about Jessica. I was sorting through tax documents when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. Mrs. Williams? This is Dr. Chen from Sacramento Family Services. We met when you brought your father in for his stroke rehabilitation. I remembered Dr. Chen, a kind woman in her 50s who had helped Dad through his physical therapy. Yes, of course. How can I help you? I'm calling because I've been following the news about Campbell Market's new management on social media, and I thought you should know something about Jessica Campbell. She was a client of ours 2 years ago. The story Dr. Chen told me changed everything. Jessica had come to Family Services in 2022, claiming to be the victim of elder abuse by her stepfather. She said he had manipulated her mother into changing her will, cutting Jessica out of an inheritance she was promised. The stepfather had been David Campbell. She wanted us to help her contest the will, Dr. Chen explained. She claimed your father had isolated your mother and convinced her to leave everything to you instead of splitting it with the stepchildren. But that's not true, I said. Dad died before Jessica even met my mother. That's what we discovered when we investigated. Jessica's timeline didn't match the public records. She withdrew her complaint when we asked for documentation. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but when I saw those Facebook posts claiming she was the co-founder of your family's business, I thanked Dr. Chen and hung up, my mind racing. Jessica hadn't just been manipulating Patricia for the past year. She had been planning this for much longer, researching our family, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. That evening, I called Harrison and told him everything. He listened in silence, occasionally making notes. This changes our strategy, he said when I finished. We're not just dealing with fraud anymore. This is a pattern of deliberate deception designed to steal your inheritance. Jessica targeted your mother specifically because she knew about the business and saw an opportunity. What do we do? Tomorrow, we file a civil suit. Tonight, I'm calling the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office. Flashback: the high school teacher who mistook control for love. Understanding my mother requires going back to before I was born, to the woman she was before grief and fear changed her into someone I barely recognized. Patricia Williams Ney Patterson was born in 1954, the eldest daughter of a factory foreman and a seamstress. She was the first in her family to go to college, earning a degree in mathematics from Sacramento State in 1976. She became a high school teacher at the same school where she would work for the next 35 years. By all accounts, she was good at her job. Demanding but fair, with high expectations for her students and the ability to break down complex problems into manageable steps. She met my father at a teachers' union barbecue in 1979. He was there as a guest of another teacher, an awkward but sweet man who owned a small grocery store and didn't know the difference between sine and cosine. They married in 1980. I was born 2 years later. For 25 years, our family worked like a well-calibrated machine. Dad ran the store, Mom taught mathematics, and I grew up knowing exactly what was expected of me: good grades, respectful behavior, and eventually, a practical career that would make my parents proud. Everything changed when Dad had his stroke. The man Patricia had married was decisive, competent, strong. The man who came home from the hospital was confused, frustrated, and frightened by his own limitations. Patricia, who had spent her entire career believing that every problem had a solution if you just applied the right method, suddenly found herself married to a problem she couldn't solve. She threw herself into managing his care, his recovery, and the business with the same intensity she had once brought to teaching. She made lists, created schedules, assigned tasks. When Dad died 3 years later, she simply transferred that need for control to the next available target: me. And then Jessica appeared. The legal battle officially began on a Tuesday in November. Harrison filed 3 separate actions: a civil suit claiming fraud and elder abuse, a motion to invalidate the forged asset transfer, and a formal complaint to the California State Bar Association about the notary who had stamped the false documents. The response from Patricia and Jessica's lawyer was swift and predictable. They denied all wrongdoing and filed a countersuit claiming harassment and defamation. They also filed a restraining order to prevent me from coming within 100 yards of Campbell Market or the family home. Let them, Harrison said when he called to tell me about the restraining order. It just makes them look more guilty. The first court hearing was scheduled for early December. In the meantime, Harrison advised me to document everything, avoid all contact with Patricia and Jessica, and prepare for what he called escalation tactics. He was right about the escalation. The smear campaign. It started with social media. Jessica created a series of posts on the Campbell Market Facebook page, painting me as a disgruntled former employee who was trying to destroy a family business out of spite. She shared photos of herself working in the store, smiling with customers, organizing charity drives I had actually planned and executed. The comments were brutal. Neighbors and family friends who had known me since childhood were calling me ungrateful, jealous, and worse. Someone I suspected Jessica had created a fake account and was posting detailed accusations about my mental state, my finances, and my relationship with my father. Patricia joined in with a carefully worded Facebook post about the pain of having a child turn against their family and the importance of forgiveness and healing. The post was shared dozens of times, each share adding more comments about my alleged character flaws. But the social media campaign was just the beginning. My bank account was frozen after Patricia filed a claim saying I had stolen money from the store. My car insurance was canceled because Jessica reported my vehicle as stolen. Someone again, probably Jessica, contacted my remote bookkeeping clients and told them I was in legal trouble and couldn't be trusted with financial information. The most painful escalation came 2 weeks before the court hearing. I was walking out of the grocery store, not Campbell Market, obviously, when someone called my name. I turned to see Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's mother, hurrying toward me with a concerned expression. "Margaret, dear," she said, catching her breath. "I wanted to ask you about something. Patricia came to see me yesterday. She said you've been stealing from the store for years, and now you're trying to blame it on Jessica. She seemed so worried about you." She asked if I'd seen any signs that you were having mental health issues. The conversation continued for 10 more excruciating minutes. Mrs. Rodriguez clearly didn't believe Patricia's story, but she was confused and worried. How many other people had Patricia approached with similar tales? That night, I called Harrison and told him what was happening. Character assassination, he said matter-of-factly. It's straight out of the abuser's playbook. They're trying to isolate you, make you doubt yourself, convince everyone around you that you're the problem. Is it working? Doesn't matter. The beauty of a legal case is that the truth is determined by evidence, not public opinion. And we have all the evidence we need. Flashback. The stepdaughter who learned to weaponize sympathy, Jessica Campbell, was born in 1987 in Stockton, California. Her mother, Linda, was a single parent who worked as a hotel manager and struggled to make ends meet. Jessica was an only child, bright enough to do well in school, but never quite able to hold down part-time jobs or maintain long-term friendships. According to the background check Harrison commissioned, Jessica had a pattern. She would attach herself to older women teachers, supervisors, family friends, and present herself as a surrogate daughter figure. She was charming, helpful, and always had a sob story ready about her difficult childhood and her mother's financial struggles. These relationships always followed the same trajectory. Jessica would gradually increase her requests for help with small loans, temporary housing, introductions to useful contacts. When her benefactors eventually said no or started asking questions, Jessica would disappear, often leaving behind debts and damaged relationships. She met my mother at a grief counseling group in 2020. Patricia had joined the group 2 years after Dad's death, still struggling with the loss and with her fears about aging alone. Jessica, who was there ostensibly to deal with her mother's death from cancer, immediately recognized an opportunity. Linda Campbell, it turned out, had left Jessica very little when she died. No house, no savings, no business to inherit. But Patricia Williams had all of those things, plus a daughter who lived in the family home and could potentially interfere with Jessica's plans. The seduction was slow and careful. Jessica volunteered to help Patricia with grocery shopping, home repairs, technology issues. She listened to Patricia's complaints about my work schedule, my lack of a traditional family, my failure to provide grandchildren. She slowly, carefully, began to suggest that perhaps Patricia deserved a daughter who appreciated everything she had to offer. It took 3 years, but eventually Jessica moved into our guest room temporarily while she looked for an apartment. She never found one. The court hearing was scheduled for December 15th at 9 a.m. Harrison and I met in his office an hour beforehand to review our strategy. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, fraudulent bank transfers, a pattern of deceptive behavior stretching back years. Remember, Harrison told me as we walked to the courthouse, this is just a preliminary hearing. We're not trying to win the whole case today. We're just trying to get an injunction to stop them from doing any more damage to the business while we prepare for trial. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly green. Patricia and Jessica sat at the defendant's table with their lawyer, a thin man in his 40s who kept checking his phone. They didn't look at me when I walked in. The hearing lasted 2 hours. Harrison presented our evidence methodically: the forged asset transfer, the false business registrations, the email conversations Emma had provided, the banking records showing unauthorized transfers. Jessica's lawyer tried to muddy the waters with claims about my mental state and allegations of financial mismanagement, but Judge Morrison wasn't interested in speculation. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said at the end, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order preventing further changes to Campbell Market's business registration or banking arrangements. I'm also appointing a forensic accountant to audit all financial transactions involving the business for the past 2 years. Jessica's face went white. Patricia just stared straight ahead, her jaw tight with suppressed rage. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, I'm ordering the immediate return of all Campbell Market assets to joint control pending the resolution of this case. Ms. Campbell and Ms. Williams are prohibited from making any business decisions without written consent from Ms. Margaret Williams. We had won the first round, but as we left the courthouse, Harrison cautioned me not to celebrate yet. They're going to appeal, he said, and they're going to get desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. He was right. The desperate gambit. The forensic accounting report was devastating. Over the past 18 months, Jessica had transferred nearly $75,000 from Campbell Market's accounts to her personal credit cards, claiming the expenditures were for business development and marketing initiatives. She had also been paying herself a salary of $4,000 per month as general manager, a position that had never been officially created and for which she had no employment contract. More damaging still, the accountant found evidence that Patricia had been systematically removing inventory from the store without recording the transactions, effectively stealing from her own business to cover Jessica's expenses. Harrison filed an amended complaint adding embezzlement to the list of charges. The total amount involved was now over $100,000, elevating the case from civil fraud to criminal theft. That's when Jessica made her final, desperate play. I was leaving my apartment on a Saturday morning when a young man approached me in the parking lot. He identified himself as a private investigator working for Jessica's defense team. "Ms. Williams," he said, "my client would like to propose a settlement. She's prepared to drop all claims to Campbell Market and pay restitution for any financial irregularities, in exchange for your agreement not to pursue criminal charges." "You can talk to my lawyer," I told him. "She's also prepared to provide you with information about your mother's mental health," he continued. "Information that might be relevant to the question of whether Mrs. Patricia Williams was competent to make business decisions over the past 2 years." I stopped walking. "What kind of information?" "Medical records. Doctor's appointments your mother has been hiding from you. Prescriptions for medication to treat early-stage dementia." The implication was clear. Jessica was offering to throw Patricia under the bus, to claim that my elderly mother hadn't been mentally competent when she made the decision to bring Jessica into the business. It was a brilliant strategy, actually. If Patricia was deemed incompetent, then all of her business decisions could be invalidated, including the ones that benefited Jessica. Jessica would lose everything, but she would avoid prison time for fraud and embezzlement. I looked at the private investigator and said, "Tell your client I'll give her an answer by Monday." That night, I sat in my apartment and thought about everything that had happened. The soup in my face, the forged signatures, the stolen money, the public humiliation. I thought about my father's letter and his trust that I would protect what he had built. I thought about Patricia, alone in that big house with a woman who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. And I realized that Jessica had made one crucial miscalculation. Flashback. The daughter who finally learned to say no. I was 7 years old the first time I remember being afraid of my mother's anger. I had tracked mud through the house after playing in the backyard, leaving a trail of brown footprints across her just-mopped kitchen floor. Patricia didn't yell. She never yelled. Instead, she got very quiet and very still, the way she did when a student gave the wrong answer to a math problem she had explained 5 times already. "Margaret," she said in a voice like winter, "do you think I cleaned this floor for my own enjoyment?" I knew the answer she wanted, and I gave it to her. I apologized, got the mop, and cleaned up my mess while she watched me with that expression of disappointed resignation that became so familiar over the years. For the next 45 years, I would see that same expression whenever I failed to meet her expectations. When I dated a boy she didn't approve of. When I chose business management over teaching. When I didn't get married and give her grandchildren. When I spent too much time at the store and not enough time at home. I learned to read her moods like other people read the weather. I learned to anticipate what she wanted before she asked for it. I learned to swallow my own opinions and desires to avoid that look of cold disappointment. But sitting in my apartment that night, thinking about Jessica's offer, I realized something. I was 52 years old, and I was still afraid of disappointing my mother. I was still changing my behavior to avoid that look of cold disapproval. Even now, even after everything she had done to me, part of me was considering Jessica's deal because it would be easier than facing Patricia's anger in court. That's when I understood what Dad had really been trying to tell me in his letter. He hadn't left me those documents just to protect the business. He had left them to protect me from a lifetime of bending myself into shapes that would never quite fit. On Monday morning, I called Harrison and told him my decision. Then I called the private investigator. Tell your client, I said, that if she has evidence of my mother's mental incompetence, she should have thought of that before she spent 2 years manipulating and exploiting her. Tell her that my answer is no. Ms. Williams, the investigator said, I think you should consider. Tell her, I interrupted, that I'll see her in court. The trial. The trial began on January 15th, exactly 6 months after the morning Patricia threw soup in my face. The courtroom was packed with people I recognized as former Campbell Market employees, family friends, neighbors who had followed the story in the local news. Patricia and Jessica sat at the defendant's table looking smaller than I remembered. Patricia's hair had gone completely gray since I'd last seen her, and Jessica had lost weight, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the forged documents, the email evidence Emma had provided, the financial records showing systematic theft. They called witnesses who testified about Jessica's pattern of behavior with other vulnerable women, about Patricia's increasing isolation from old friends and family members. Emma Rodriguez testified about the emails she had saved, about the way Jessica had spoken about me and about the business. Dr. Chen from Family Services testified about Jessica's earlier, failed attempt to contest Dad's will. The defense's strategy was exactly what I had expected. They claimed that I was a disgruntled daughter who had manipulated my aging father into cutting out other family members, and that Jessica was simply trying to protect Patricia from my financial abuse. Jessica testified on her own behalf, and I had to admit she was compelling. She spoke softly, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, describing how worried she had been about Patricia's welfare and how frightened she was of my increasingly erratic behavior. But then Harrison began his cross-examination. Miss Campbell, he said, approaching the witness stand, you testified that you were concerned about my client's treatment of her mother. Can you explain why, if you were so concerned, you waited until after you had moved into Mrs. Williams' home to express these concerns? I wanted to understand the situation better before I acted. I see. And during this time when you were understanding the situation, did you discuss your concerns with Mrs. Williams' doctor? Her friends? Any other family members? I thought it was better to handle it within the family. Harrison nodded and picked up a document from his table. Ms. Campbell, do you recognize this email, dated June 15th of last year? Jessica leaned forward to look at the paper. Her face went pale. I might have written something like that. This is an email from you to your boyfriend, Marcus Stewart, isn't it? Would you like me to read the relevant portion to the jury? Jessica's lawyer objected, but Judge Morrison overruled him. Harrison read aloud. The old lady is completely under my thumb now. All I have to do is convince her that the daughter is stealing from the business, and she'll sign over everything. It's almost too easy. By Christmas, I'll own half of a grocery store worth $2 million, and Maggie will be out on her ass where she belongs. The courtroom was completely silent. Jessica sat frozen in the witness chair, her mouth open but no words coming out. Ms. Campbell, Harrison continued, does this sound like the language of someone who is concerned about an elderly woman's welfare? The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Jessica guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, and identity theft. They also found Patricia liable for civil damages, though they recommended leniency due to her status as a victim of Jessica's manipulation. Jessica was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution of $127,000. Patricia was given 2 years probation and required to undergo counseling for victims of financial abuse. As for Campbell Market, the court ruled that the business belonged entirely to me, as specified in my father's true will. Patricia's ownership stake, which she had acquired through marriage, was forfeited due to her participation in the fraud. The resolute, 6 months after the trial, I reopened Campbell Market under its original name. I had spent the time renovating the interior, updating the inventory systems, and rebuilding relationships with suppliers who had been confused by the conflicting messages they had received during the legal battle. Emma Rodriguez came back to work for me, now as assistant manager while she finished her MBA. Several former employees returned as well, eager to be part of the store's fresh start. Patricia never came to see the reopening. She had moved to a smaller apartment across town and, according to mutual acquaintances, was slowly rebuilding her life with the help of the court-ordered counselor. I heard that she had rejoined the grief counseling group where she had first met Jessica, this time as a support for other women who had been targeted by financial predators. I thought about reaching out to her, but Harrison advised against it. Give her time, he said. And give yourself time too. Some relationships can be repaired, but they all need to prove they're worth repairing first. Epilogue. 3 years later, I'm writing this on a Sunday morning in my apartment, which I kept even after the business became profitable again. It's small but peaceful, with a view of the garden courtyard where I grow the herbs I use for cooking. The soup bowl Patricia sent me, yes, she eventually sent back the bowl, clean and carefully wrapped, sits on my kitchen counter. I use it sometimes, not out of nostalgia, but because it's a good bowl for soup. Campbell Market is thriving. We're known now for our local products, our community events, and our commitment to fair prices for working families. Emma graduated with her MBA last year and is now a full partner in the business. We're planning to open a second location next year. I speak at women's conferences sometimes about financial abuse and family manipulation. It's not something I ever expected to do, but I've learned that telling your story can help other people find the courage to tell theirs. 2 months ago, I ran into Patricia at the farmer's market downtown. She was standing at a vegetable stall, examining tomatoes with the same critical eye she had always brought to produce shopping. She looked older but healthier somehow, less pinched around the edges. We didn't speak, but we nodded to each other. A small acknowledgement that we had both survived what happened between us. As I walked away, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had been necessary for a while. It gave me the energy to fight when fighting was what I needed to do. But I didn't need it anymore. That afternoon, I cleaned out the last box of Dad's papers from my closet. At the bottom, I found a photograph I had forgotten about, Dad and me at Campbell Market's 25th anniversary celebration in 1998. I'm wearing my high school graduation dress, and he's wearing his best tie, the blue one with the tiny anchors that Mom always said was too casual for important occasions. We're standing in front of the store, both of us squinting in the California sunshine, both of us smiling like we shared a secret. In the photo, I can see what Dad saw when he looked at me. Not the daughter who disappointed her mother by not becoming a teacher, but the woman who would carry on what he had built. I keep that photo on my desk now, next to the handkerchief he embroidered for my 15th birthday. I see you, Maggie. Always. He was right. He did see me. And after 52 years of trying to be the daughter everyone else wanted, I finally learned to see myself too. Sometimes the story you've waited your whole life to tell starts when you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to tell it. Sometimes it starts with a bowl of soup thrown in anger and ends with the same bowl, cleaned and returned, sitting quietly on your counter. Sometimes it starts when you finally realize that love isn't supposed to hurt, and family isn't supposed to be a prison, and you are allowed to save yourself even when no one else will. Especially when no one else will. I'm not telling you this story to make you feel sorry for me, or to convince you that all families are toxic, or to suggest that cutting ties is always the answer. I'm telling you this story because I know there are women reading this who recognize themselves in it. Women who have spent years accommodating, compromising, and shrinking themselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for them. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that it's possible to love someone and still protect yourself from them. It's possible to honor your family's legacy without sacrificing your own future. It's possible to be grateful for what you receive while still refusing to accept what you don't deserve. And I'm telling you this because I want you to know that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply stop accepting unacceptable behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the people hurting you is to step away and let them experience the natural consequences of their choices. The soup bowl sits on my counter, clean and useful again. But it doesn't define our story anymore. I do. That's what freedom looks like, sometimes. Not a grand gesture or a dramatic confrontation, but just a quiet morning when you realize you're no longer afraid of your own life. When you wake up and make coffee and look out the window and think, this is mine. I built this. I chose this. When you finally understand that you were never the problem that needed solving. You were always the solution that was waiting to be discovered.